to change their ways or to give up some of the things that are favorable to them is not easy. So there are times that you need to negotiate, to compromise, or to propose a better program. That's why you become program developer. Or when you introduce new way of doing things, you try to convince them that this procedure is better. Okay, so what are the categories of social policy? Can anyone read sa policy demands?
Doc,
Okay, please read.
policy demands. These are demands or claims made upon official of government or private agencies by other sectors, private of official in the political system for action on some perceived problems.
So when we say policy demands, we are claiming something, or we, let's say, ask the government to be more transparent, or we ask the government to be more accountable in some aspect, or we try to convince other sectors to be involved in actions that will help solve certain problems. Example, I can perfectly think of the issues of environment sa policy demands, because it's most of the time ang mga environmentalists, they are really calling for help sa mga lain-lain ng mga sector, so that the policies for the protection of environment will not be violated in exchange of profit, or whatever it is that certain companies, or let's say government from other countries, would also offer in exchange of, let's say, building something in a certain area that's supposed to be in the. Okay, so we can demand for the government to respect those policies or agreements made before. Meanwhile, when I say policy decisions, please read Faith Marie.
The
Yes, please read.
policies decision, the
Yes.
policy decisions are made by officers of organization that authorize or give direction and content to policy actions. Included are decision to enact statutes, issues, executive orders, administrative order, and board resolutions. In the public sector, these include the promulgations of administrative rule and the judicial interpretation of the laws.
Okay, so ang examples of policy decisions are those agreed or decided upon, let's say by the court or Supreme Court. So jurisprudence, it forms part of the policy decisions. Or we can also think of decisions in terms of executive orders, administrative order, or board resolution. Then policy statements are formal expression or articulation of policy, meaning they are put into statement. Most of the time, i-publish, kag i-sign siya, because there are types of laws na require publication before it becomes valid. It's important to inform the people of the policies so that they will also be aware, and at the same time the purpose of policies are to guide people as to their actions. So if they are not informed, so it defeats the purpose ni guide ta ni ang policy. Okay. Policy outputs are tangible manifestations of policies, and these are what the organizations do as distinguished from what they say. So ano ang mga products or concrete examples that indeed the policy is being observed or followed? The actual number of services delivered and the number of people served are the quantifiable measures of policy outputs. So, most of the time, gina-ask ang documentation as to policy output. Let's say, when you ask people not to travel or you close other institutions, let's say, para mas makarelate mga COVID-19 restrictions, we expect that following those policies will create output. Because if ang certain policy implement siya kag wala yan na-achieve ang desired output or outcome, most of the time you expect people nga mareklamo sila because there's no use gali of making them follow those policies if it will not help them achieve the purpose. When we say policy outcomes, these are the consequences for a client system, intended or unintended. So, in effect, may mga intended or nadala na lang ang mga result because of following those policy. Like when in the long run, people, let's say, no, in terms of COVID-19, ang isa sa mga policy outcome is the change in the educational system and in the work setup. So, may mga outcome nga unintended because of certain declarations. Okay, how do we classify them? So when we say public policy, from the term itself, it could be given or coming from any government authority. So government authority in the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. So kung sila nag-create ng policy, meaning amo na siya na name and after them. If it's the Congress or the Sanggunian, it's called legislative policy. If it's coming from the office of the president, it is the executive policy or from their memorandum or any proclamation. If it comes from a court decision, it is called judicial policy. When we say administrative policy, it refers to the policies within the context of a particular problem or program, such as administrative orders, guidelines, or directives. Let's say, kung sa school, ang president ng school ang ma-create some policy, it's an administrative policy. Or in your work or certain area, it is considered administrative policy because it comes from people who are in the top or who are given the power to create plans in relation to how the things should be done in your respective work or school or organization. When we say agency policy, which you will be able to appreciate more when you do your group output, what are the policies that are being observed in particular agency? What are the rules? If it's a center, nga may mga, let's say, girls, what are the rules? What are the procedures, regulations? What are the basis? Who gets, let's say, sino ang may mga certain privileges? Why are they given such privileges? So, the basis or the manual of operations form part the agency policy because it ensures that the goals and objectives of those agency are being achieved and that they can only be achieved when you follow those policy. Can you imagine an agency nga wala gid siya policy, so what do you think will happen? So most of the time, di ba, it will create chaos. Of course, it's not automatic. Pwede man nga from that having no policy, people will decide to come up some rules. So, nagka-policy sila from the practice. So, this will affect the clients, their programs, their services, So ang agency policy also includes how the agency will utilize their funds, what part will get most of the funds, what specific programs, then the methods of implementations and evaluation. When we say policy practice, this refers to the efforts to change policies in the legislative agency, community settings, whether by establishing new policies or improving existing ones or defeating the policy initiatives of other people. And policy advocacy are policy practice that aims to help relatively powerless groups improve their resources and opportunities. So there are a lot of NGOs nga ang ilang focus ang marginalized or those who are oppressed. So they are advocating to improve their access to resources and to provide them with opportunities. The changing context affecting social policy and social work. Sige, you already know this in your previous classes, but let us run through them. Like the ideas context, how we believe that such policy should be given more importance. How do we see the poor? What are our values and beliefs? Our demographic context, what would be the appropriate in terms of the profile of the people. Let's say mas damo bata or mas damo tigulang or mas damo women. So such context or demographic context or its profile, the characteristics of the people would affect policies. The organizational context, what the tensions between the national and local government and the conflicts between the government and non-government or their type of agreement. So it's not all the time nga tension or conflict. Pwede ang ilang sense of closeness or being able to go along well can also affect the context. The international context, which we cannot do away because ang Philippines is part of the international community. So we cannot close our doors. We cannot say nga ang policies today are just internal because whether we like it or not, we will be affected by the international community and that we have to respect the international frameworks and agreements given, and we are being affected by globalization, the issue of peace and security, the human rights, and even the concept of fundamental freedom, which we must respect. In any development discourse, it's important to understand that the um, concept of financial stability of any country would also affect policy. So, ang fiscal policy would also affect social policies because not just in terms of funding but also in terms of giving benefits to the people. Okay, the discourse of a public sphere promoted by the civil society and social movements, also known as alternative development, gives primacy to participation and empowerment. Okay, so later on, if you will be involving in social research, may mga organizations that will tap you to help them conduct research in terms of understanding how can we change policies or whether or not a certain policy is helping the people achieve participation and empowerment. In the international framework, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal United Nations Convention of Political and Civil Rights, the UN Convention of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention for Migrant Workers, along with other international framework, also affects the policy in the Philippines. Example, ang Magna Carta of Women, it should all of its provisions should be considering the provision of the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, mga international laws. even the laws in the Philippines for children should respect the Convention on the Rights of Children in the international community. So dapat wala sila ga conflict, because if ga conflict sila, one of its provision can be considered as void because it does not consider the international context. Okay, in terms of policy process, it's important to understand how you set the agenda, which we have established last time, that the agenda should be developmental, that it should promote positive change to people. And then how we formulate the policies, how we legitimize it. When we say legitimize, we refer to how people will accept that policy, embrace it, and follow it. Policy implementation and policy evaluation. Okay. In stages of policy formulation, the issues, problems, identification, the definition of problem. So it's the same context. Lain-lain lang ang pag-set up sa word, but you can um, still look at it from the stage of identifying what's the problem to gathering data to establishing your goals, or what's helping process your planning stage towards implementation. So, since nakafocus sa policy formulation, dira siya hasta sa pag-formulate. From the idea coming from trying to address certain problems towards translating it into plans. Okay, the stages of policy formulation should also legitimize the goal and declare the purpose through law and statute. So, ang laws na ginalantaw today are laws that respect the rights of people and promote their development. Planning for program development and implementation, and then evaluation towards policy analysis. Okay, from the policy analysis, still, lain-lain lang ang pag-set, but from you try to understand or internalize it from the stage nga gin-identify mo ang problem hasta na kita mo ang mga goals, you formulate your hypothesis or framework, you determine your criteria, you identify your alternatives, you evaluate, you compare the alternatives, and then you assess the outcome. So that's how you analyze. And the last is social welfare policy, just for us to see its connection. But I will be sending you another video explaining this. But before I end, i-define ta lang ang social welfare policy so we can relate kung diin halin ang social welfare policy. So the social welfare policy is a subset of social policy. It refers to the societal responses to specific needs and problems. Let's say poverty and other issues. Kag subong, we know that there are a lot of issues facing the country. Kaya may mga changes kag problems pagid nga dala sang pandemic, and although let's say ma-end man siya, its effect will not end instantly. The specific area of social work curriculum, a practice area towards policy advocacy. And social welfare policy includes the laws and regulations that govern which social welfare exists, what categories of clients will be served, and who qualifies for a given program, including its standards. So, part siya sang social welfare policy ang pag-identify kung sino ang tagaan, given that the resources are limited. And at the same time, there are types of programs that are focused para sa particular sector. Social welfare programs are expressions of social welfare policy. So when you translate the social welfare policy into something na mabatyagan na sa isang kliyente kag isang community, it becomes a social welfare program. It must reflect and show the intent to empower the individual. So it must focus on empowering the people.